So the verse 61 says, if there is any sickness or any plague, which is not written in the book of this law. That is the book of law. It's not the same as the book of the covenant. Yahweh does bring upon you until you are destroyed. So there is a mention of the book of the law. So can we safely conclude that the cases and the plagues are written in the book of the law, not the book of the covenant? Does that make sense? To me it does. Because there are no cases, or rather let me say these cases talked about here, which are found in the book of the law, are not to be found in the book of the covenant. Then, in Deuteronomy 29 verse 21, the book of the law is specifically mentioned. Listen to what it says here. And Yahweh shall separate him for evil, shall separate him for evil out of all the tribes of Yahshua, according to all the cases of the covenant that are written in this book of the Torah. So these cases, I like this. So these cases are coming as a result of breaking the covenant. Yeah? Can you hear that? Yahweh shall separate him for evil out of all tribes of Yahshua, according to all the cases of the covenant that are written in this book of the Torah. So we have a covenant, right, that Yahweh has made with these people. Breaking that covenant has got resultant cases. And the cases are not written in the book of the covenant, they are written in the book of the law. Beloved, I want us to establish the existence of two books right from the beginning. The book of the covenant and the book of the law. If we know this structure, this existing structure already in the Torah, if we can understand it and identify it and see how it works, I'm telling you for certainty, we will not have problems with the writings of the New Testament, so-called New Testament. We will not have problems of understanding some of the writings alluded to Shaul. We will not have problems with that. It is quite clear there is no mention of cases before, during, or at the initiation of the Shemot 19 verse 5, right up to its ratification at the Shemot 24 verse 8. There is no mention of cases here, except for one specific case in Shemot chapter 20 verse 5. You do not bow to them nor serve them, for I, Yahweh, your Elohim, am a jealous El, visiting the crookedness of the fathers on the children to the third and the fourth generations of those who hate me. Only, that is the only case that you find associated with the book of the covenant. But this is a commandment with a resultant action coming as a result of breaking it. It's part and parcel of this commandment. Right. So, visiting the iniquities of the father to the third and the fourth generation is one specific individual family, limited case, along with personal restitutions and their penalties as contained in the book of the covenant in Shemot chapter 20 to 23. Okay, these do not cover all the personal and national cases and the collective action required for the covenant breaking as contained in the book of the law. The book of the law has got its own cases that are well enunciated, and cases that are not only personal but national in nature and in fulfillment. We know these. When we talk about Deuteronomy 28, we know about these national cases, right? These are not found in the book of the covenant. Right? And the collective action required for covenant breaking, we know that. what happened to Akani, we know what happened at the Battle of Ai, all these things, all these collective actions that were supposed to be done because of the breaking of the law contained in the as contained in the book of the law, and expounded in Shemos chapter 25 to 40. And the whole books of Waikarara, that's in Bantu. In Bantu language, what they call Waikra, we call it Waikarara. You mean he's calling out. We're calling out for a meeting. The book that they call Leviticus, Bemidbar, which is Numbers, and Devarim, which is Deuteronomy. So we can see the distinction between these two books. So let us now dig a little deeper and see what is in each of these books. Remember the book of the covenant runs distinct from the book of the law. And these two books make up what we call the Torah or the Torah. And what we see is that the book of the covenant or the book of the law has got the moral law as it is given in the book of the covenant, plus the cases. What else is there? What else is there in the book of the law? Let's look at the book of the law. As I said, the book of the law contains everything that is in the book of the covenant, plus the added law. Plus the added law. Let us take note of that. Now, what is in the book of the covenant that is not in the book of the law? Yahweh has been making a covenant with all his people right from Adama and confirming that covenant until Abraham in Part6 chapter 12. This is the oath of the covenant. Let's understand it, beloved. And Yahweh said to Abraham, go yourself out of your land, from your relatives, and from your father's house, to a land which I show you. And I shall make you a great nation, and bless you, and make you a great name. And you shall be a blessing. And I shall bless those who bless you, and curse him who curses you. You know that, and in you all the clans of the earth shall be blessed. A lot of people, especially those who are in Israel, they are claiming these verses to themselves. I mean, we hear a lot of people that are being foolishly being deceived to support Israel, to support what's happening there in Palestine by the Khazarian Jews. It's just lack of understanding of what the history of the scripture is about, and lack of knowledge of who the true Hebrews or the true Israelites are. I mean, you need just to read books written by the same Khazars. Arthur Koestler is one who wrote another book that identifies the present people that are occupying the land, who are imposters to that land. And the whole world is consumed with wanting to support that establishment there. But anyway, scripture is not talking about them. We will soon see, and we are seeing it happening, and we will soon see. Yahweh says, and they shall know that I have always loved you. Those who falsely claim to be Yahudim when they are not, and yet they are of the synagogue of Ashatan. You know, I will expose them at the end of the time, and they will be exposed. We know that. So we see that this covenant in Part6 chapter 12 verse 1, Yahweh tells our forefather Abraham to leave the house of his fathers. And remember I said that that land where they were, the land which was initially the land of Nimrod, right? We know Nimrod was a grandson of Ham, and these people were living together in that place. Abraham was living with his father Terah was living with this nation of Hamites who were dwelling in that place, who were the kings of that place. And there Yahweh says to him, I shall take you out of this land, and you shall go to a land that I shall give you, and I will make you a great nation, and I will barakah you and make you a great name. And then he says, you shall be a huge barakah to the nations of the world. In other words, through Abraham, the whole world is going to be blessed, right? And then he speaks in verse 3 and says, I shall bless those who bless you. In other words, those who bless Abraham shall be blessed by him, and that means up to his posterity. And those who curse him, who curses Abraham and his posterity, they shall also be cursed. And in you all the clans of the earth shall be blessed. So the blessing or the barakah that Yahweh is talking about is ultimately the giving of the coming of the salvation of the world. I don't see any blessing greater than that. So Abraham is the source. It is from his seed that the nations are going to be blessed, right, or to be given salvation. So, but this was an unconditional covenant. Actually, Yahweh swore by no one higher than himself. Hebrew chapter 6 verse 13 says, for when Elohim made the promise to Abraham, because he could swear by no greater, he swore by himself. So this covenant was made. Yahweh swearing by himself, making himself the assurance of the fulfillment of this covenant. Right? So it is not about what Abraham does that makes this covenant to be fulfilled. It is Yahweh himself who is going to work right through for this covenant to be fulfilled. Hey, that he makes a promise. He says, my son, I will do this and this and this for you. If you obey me, I will make you a great nation. But see, Abraham's descendants did not obey Yahweh. And Yahweh goes out of his way because of his love for this nation, or because of his love and the promises that he made to Abraham. He goes out of his way to give these descendants of Abraham obedience. Nothing of ours. Nothing of our own. All we need to do as a nation is to place ourselves and say, Abba, Yah, take me just the way I am and do what you want to do with this vessel. It's all yours. If we give him permission, that's all. That's all. Nothing that we can do of ourselves except giving him the permission to work out salvation in us. Because ourselves, as human beings, ourselves as the children of Abraham, are in no position whatsoever to commend ourselves unto salvation. We are in no position, beloved, to make ourselves qualified for that salvation. So, we see that Yah made an oath here in Part6 chapter 12, which is a covenant. So Yah is agreeing and covenanting to himself, to barakah Abraham and his descendants. There is no death penalty attached to this unconditional covenant. There is no death penalty attached to it. He says, I will do this for you. I will do it. And he says he will do it all by himself. This is before Part6 chapter 15. The promise is made, done, and sealed. It is unconditional. The only thing that Abraham has to do is obey Yah's leading and get out. Abraham had no part to this covenant. So when Hebrews chapter 8 verse 8 says, for finding fault with them, it must certainly be not this covenant. Because this covenant had no fault in it. It was Yahweh himself covenanting to himself, agreeing to him. There is no fault in the things of Yahweh. There is no dirty in them. But then here in chapter 15, we see that I mean, we see here in Hebrews chapter 8, the scripture saying there was fault that was found in them. So it must certainly be not this covenant. Yah is sworn by himself because there is no human part to this covenant. Let's fast forward to Part6 chapter 15. In Part6 15 verse 1 says, after these events, the word of Yahweh came to Abraham in a vision saying, do not be afraid, Abraham. I'm your shield, your reward is exceedingly great. Verse 2 says, and Abraham said, Master Yahweh, what would you give me, seeing I go childless? And the heir of my house is Eliezer of Damascus. And Abraham said, see, you have given me no seed, and see, one born in my house is my heir. And see, the word of Yahweh came to him saying, this one is not your heir, but he who comes from your own body is your heir. And he brought him outside this and said, look now towards the heavens and count the stars if you are able to count them. And he said to him, so are your seed. So Abraham is told in his ripe age there that if you can count the stars, that's the number of your children. And he couldn't count. I mean, you can't count the stars. And so Abraham's assurance is great, is beyond his imagination. We see Abraham wanting an assurance. He goes on to want an assurance, a proof that Yah would fulfill his word. Don't we all do that? Don't we all do that? Do you know, if we could take Yahweh's word at first and go with it, we save ourselves a lot of unnecessary work. A lot of things that we would need to do in order for us to be able to see the proof, we would never have to do them because we are accepting the word of Yah by belief and accepting it as truth, and if we do that, it pleases Him. And Part6 15 verse 9 says, Part6 15 verse 8, and he said, Master Yahweh, whereby do I know that I possess it? Right. After asking this question, then a condition is attached to the covenant, which was to be fulfilled 430 years later. Now, here's the condition. Part6 15 verse 9, and he said to him, now there is need for blood now. Bring me a 3-year-old heifer, and a 3-year-old female goat, and a 3-year-old ram, and a turtle dove, and a young pigeon. And he took all these to him and cut them in the middle and placed each half opposite the other, but he did not cut the birds. Verse 11 says, and the birds of prey came down on the carcasses, and Abraham drove them away. And it came to be, when the sun was going down, and a deep sleep. Now the word translated to sleep here in Hebrew is Tadema. It means, Hebrew 72:90, it means lethargy. Or by implication, he was in a trance or a deep sleep. This can only mean Abraham was in a trance, not asleep, because you need two conscious parties to participate and perform the covenant. The man was busy participating in the covenant. And you can't just decide to sleep before Yahweh when He is working out salvation in you. No, you can't do that. But it is of most logic that this, what fell upon Abraham, was actually a trance. He went into a trance. Right. And so Scripture says, he went into a deep sleep. And the deep sleep fell upon Abraham. That sea, when he was in that trance, a frightening great darkness fell upon him. Now, let's go to verse 13. Yah is speaking to Abraham. And he said to Abraham, know for certain that your seed are to be sojourners in a land that is not theirs, and shall serve them, and they shall afflict them 400 years. So you can't speak to someone who is sleeping. This was a trance like situation where Yahweh is speaking to the man. He is not awake in the normal sense, but he has been taken into the spiritual realm, and he's communicating with Yahweh in that realm. Right. So I want us to see that here is the covenant, and the book of the covenant was based upon this covenant, which Yahweh performed with Abraham. It was the record of this covenant. That was the book of the covenant. So when Jeremiah says, in the way of the verses that we read in chapter 31, verse 31, see, the days are coming, declares Yahweh, when I shall make a new covenant with the house of Yeshua, with the house of Yehuda, not like the covenant I made with their fathers in the day when I took them by hand to bring them out of the land of Mizraim. My covenant which they broke, though I was a husband to them, declares Yahweh. So you see, the only blood ratified covenant that our forefathers were physically part to was the book of the covenant in Shemot chapter 19 verse 5 to Shemot chapter 24 verse 8. And this they broke, yet Yahweh had given the promises. Our forefathers broke the covenant. They broke it. Part 12 verse 2, and I shall make you a great nation, and bless you, and make your name great, and you shall be a blessing. And I shall bless those who bless you, and curse him who curses you. And in you all the clans of the earth shall be blessed. A promise of the land was given here. They were supposed just to obey Yah. Obey Yah, and all things would come to happen. Verse 7 says, Part 12 verse 7 says, and Yahweh appeared to Abraham and said, to your seed I give this land. This is the very same promise that Yahweh repeated to our forefathers in Exodus, Shemot chapter 19 verse 5 to 24 verse 8. The same promise of the land. This book of the covenant is what Shaul in Galatians 3 verse 17 to 18 refers to as the seal, inheritance, the fulfillment of the promise. Let's read that. Galatians 3 verse 17. It says, now this I say, Torah that came 430 years later does not annul a covenant previously confirmed by Elohim in Mashiach, so as to do away with the promise. So Shaul is very clear. There is no need for anyone to confuse this. So Shaul, in verse 17, he talks of a covenant that was made 430 years later. I mean 430 years before. This is the covenant Yahweh made with Abraham, and he said, and your children shall be captured, shall go into captivity 400 years to come. Now, okay, now verse 17. Now this I say, Torah that came 430 years later does not annul a covenant previously confirmed by Elohim in Mashiach, so as to do away with the promise. No, that promise still stands. It shows that the book of the covenant, or the inheritance, right, was 430 years from the fulfillment of the promises given in Part6 chapter 15. Because those promises came 430 years later. Let's read verse 18. For if the inheritance is by Torah, it is no longer by promise, but Elohim gave it to Abraham through a promise. The Torah now that came 430 years later is the book of the law. This is the book that has got cases. Genesis 3:10. For as many as are of the works of the Torah are under the curse, for it has been written, cursed is everyone who does not continue in all that has been written in the book of the Torah to do them. So there is a distinction here. The book of inheritance right? The book of the covenant, which is also called the seal, is not the same as the book of the law. It's not one and the same thing. Let me continue here. Cursed is everyone who does not continue in all that has been written in the book of the Torah to do them, and that no one is declared right by Torah before Elohim is clear, for the righteous shall live by belief. So the book of the law, the book of the book which had added cases, that the doings of that book does not justify a man. What was written in those books can never justify you. Now, you ask me what was written in those books. Well, it is in this added law you will see that is where the laws of priesthood, when priesthood went over to Aaron, moving from the household. Right? Remember, the Melchizedek priesthood pertained to household priesthood. That was how things were running, right from the Garden of Eden. But now, when our forefathers sinned, the priesthood was promised to the house of Levi, because he went forward and became Yahweh's servant to be used by Yahweh, so that he could do the work of bringing back Yasharah to its owner. So now the priesthood now was given to the house of Levi, and they had to write the instructions pertaining to their priesthood. So these instructions also pertained to sacrifices as well. These instructions of the priesthood, which they call the Levitical instructions, these instructions now dealt with salvation. They dealt with salvation, though they were dealing with salvation, but they could not cleanse the conscience. Because, you see, this book will say, if you commit a sin, for you not to be killed or to go to death, you must bring a sacrifice. But there were some sins that you could not even do that. Some sins, you could bring a sacrifice and those sins will be forgiven. So in other words, the book of the law had to do with saving someone. Yet the book of the covenant, or the book of the Torah of the covenant, that the Torah in there was dealing with showing you how you should live. How you should be in communion with Abba. It was an instructor, a teacher of righteousness. The book of the covenant does not tell you instructions of how you are saved, but they tell you instructions of who you worship and how you should live righteously. So this has got nothing to do with the cross, so-called cross. It has got nothing to do with the works of salvation. The works of salvation are those works whereby you bring a lamb. Those are your own works, beloved. You bring a lamb, you cut it, you collect the blood, you give it to the high priest. These are the works of salvation that they had to do for them to be saved. But we know that these works, they were only standing in place as a transitional measure of salvation. It wasn't the permanent solution to the sin problem. It was an intermediate measure, intermediate solution, a transitional solution to the problem of sin, which was supposed to be done in faith or in belief, accepting the ultimate sacrifice of Yahweh, which had power to cleanse the conscience. Yet the sacrifices of sheep and goats, on its own, that mechanical aspect of it has no power to cleanse our conscience. Yet, when we accept the blood of Yahusha, it has got the miraculous power to change us, to change our characters, to change our being. That's the distinction. So, I want us to understand this structure, beloved. I want us to understand this structure. If we do not understand this structure, we will not understand what is going forward. Let me continue. Shaul says, and that no one, verse 11, Galatians chapter 3, verse 10. For as many as are of works of the Torah are under the curse. For it has been written, cursed is everyone who does not continue in all that has been written in the book of the Torah to do them. So you receive a curse, you receive destruction if you do not obey the laws in the book of the law. If you don't go according to those instructions, you are cursed. You are not going to be saved. And that no one is declared right by that Torah before Elohim is clear. For the righteous shall live by belief. Right? You believe, accept that Yahweh will give a lamb. And that lamb will stand for my propitiation. That it will be it that will stand on my place. Right? So that where I was supposed to receive eternal death, I do not receive it. Because he has already saved. Because I'm already counted saved when I accept that sacrifice. And the Torah, that's the book of the law, is not of belief, but the man who does them shall live by them. So, you could perform rituals. You can perform rituals. You can take a lamb, slaughter it, cut it, collect the blood. You can perform those rituals. You don't necessarily have to believe. That's why many of them who did that did not please Elohim. So this Torah does not please Yah, because many would take lambs, pigeons, whatever, name it, and go sacrifice, but they did not have the belief. And so it will not please Yah. The book of the law has got to do with the doing, acting according to the instructions and executing. Right? Whereas with Abraham, it was about belief, not just doing. Abraham believed Yahweh and it was accounted to him as righteousness. Verse 13, Galatians 3. Messiah redeemed us from the curse of the Torah, having become a curse for us, for it was written, cursed is everyone who hangs upon a tree. In doing that, the blessing of Abraham might come upon the nations in Messiah, Yahusha, to receive the promise of the Spirit through belief. So what was the promise of the Spirit? We know Yahweh is Spirit. Right? And those that worship Him must worship in spirit and in truth. So what did He promise Yahweh? Brothers, verse 15, as a man I say it, a covenant, even though it is men's, yet if it is confirmed, no one sets it aside or adds to it. But the promises were spoken to Abraham and to his seed. These cases are found in the book of the law. So we need to rightly divide the word to distinguish between the law written in our hearts and the law that pronounces cases to us. Those are the two laws. So you will find in the scriptures, you find even when you read Shaul's writings, there's the law of sin. You can't say the moral law is the law of sin. There's the law of death. You can't say the moral law is the law of death. I mean, we need to look and see these things in scripture. We can't say everywhere it's written law and then we start to think that it is the book of the covenant or it is the law of Yahweh. No! That's a misinterpretation of scripture. There are many laws. Natural laws are there. So, Hebrews chapter 10 verse 6 says, this is the covenant that I shall make with them after those days, says Yahweh, giving my laws into their hearts and in their minds I shall write them. Why? Why would these laws be in the interim done away with now in this age of so-called Christianity, why must these laws be done away with, and then in the end Yahweh makes them permanent in us? Why? Any reasoning mind would not accept such a teaching. It's falsehoods. It's deception. He says, and their sins, right, giving my laws into their hearts, and in their minds I shall write them. And their sins and their lawlessness I shall remember no more. Now, where there is forgiveness of these, there is no longer a slaughter offering for sin. So when the forgiveness has come, the ultimate Lamb of Yahweh has come, there is no need, beloved, to continue slaughtering. Even that slaughtering does not please Yahweh. He says, your sacrifices are an abomination before my face. Even those sacrifices that our forefathers did, they did them without faith, and they participated in the festivals without faith, without belief, without obedience, and all those things, they did not please Yahweh. But it does not mean that Yahweh is saying you should not sacrifice ourselves, for we are supposed to sacrifice our bodies. That's what the scripture teaches. We are supposed to keep the feast of Yahweh. That's what the scriptures teach. But when we do them without belief, when we do them without the Spirit of Yahweh, then it will not please Him. It won't please me. It won't please Yahweh. You get, this is what the prophet also Jeremiah spoke. We read that verse, Jeremiah 31, verse 31. It's a repetition of what we just read now. Right? Now, so rightly dividing the word shows that there is a Torah that has got cases, and there is a Torah that must be written in the hearts. One must be able to distinguish between these two. The book of the covenant has got the promises and inheritance and the seal. The seal having the moral standard of worship and righteous living. This guide to true worship and righteous living is found encapsulated in the 10 Commandments, covenant, and the book of the law.